Alright, let me take you through the process of making one of my fabric masks. First, you're going to need 4 pieces of cotton, 6.5 by 5 inches, and 2 pieces of non-woven iron-on interfacing of the same size. I'm going to line them all up on top of each other. If I had been using a patterned fabric, I would need to make sure that right sides were facing each other. And then, as I grab the interfacing, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that the iron-on sides, the rough sides, are facing each other and the soft side is facing out. This will all make sense when we have to iron together when everything is cut. I have a template that I like to use. I've included it on my website. You can go ahead and print and use it as well. I use a regular ink pen to just trace right onto the interfacing. The interfacing will be on the inside. You'll never see it, so if you get some ink outside the template, it doesn't really matter. Once it's traced and everything is stacked accordingly, go ahead and clip or pin everything together so that it stays lined up. Use a nice sharp scissors. You'll notice that I am cutting with a little bit of extra outside of the lines that I drew. This is because for me, a mask fits me best when I give myself my seam allowance in addition to the template. I feel like that's a pretty average size adult mask. I'd probably give myself an extra 3/8 of an inch. I go ahead and recycle the fabric and I hold on to the interfacing scraps. You'll see why later. Then go ahead and take your fabric and separate it out. The pieces that you want to be the outside of your mask, you will iron the interfacing onto. Make sure that you're ironing onto the wrong sides of the fabric. I do a quick press just to make sure that the interfacing doesn't move when I move on to actually ironing it onto the fabric. Watch your fingers if you use a steam setting so that you don't burn yourself. Once you go ahead and iron the pieces and get everything nice and flat and secure, go ahead and sandwich them together, right sides together. And you're going to sew the seam there, and you'll do the same thing to the inner piece. Okay, now I'm moving over to my machine, and I'm just doing a simple straight stitch. You'll notice I back stitched at the top, following the curve straight along, and back stitching at the bottom. Go ahead and grab the other one. You'll notice I start a little bit further away from the top. The fabric isn't always the sturdiest right there at the top, so I like to give myself a little bit extra space. Back stitch on each as well. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and put the pieces together now. First thing I'm going to want to do is take the inner piece of fabric, flip it right side out, and iron that seam to make it nice and crisp. Pretty quick and easy. Set that aside, and with this one, now this is where you take those scraps of interfacing that you saved and get big enough ones that will fold over the seam. Line them all the way up. This way you're going to create a barrier that goes all the way across the mask with no gaps. Once you've lined it up, do a quick press to set them, flip the mask over, and fold the different tabs down. Really press them in here. Definitely don't use a steam setting because you have to get your hand pretty close to the iron and you don't want to burn yourself. You'll notice that by doing this, there are no gaps in the interfacing. It creates a really good barrier for the inner portion of the mask. Press for as long as you need to for your particular type of interfacing. There we go, nice seal. So now I'm going to take that piece we ironed before and place it inside. So you'll notice the right sides of the fabric are facing each other. I'm going to go ahead and line the seams up on top and clip in place. I always start there first, and then I just kind of zhuzh the fabric so that it lines up along the sides. It may or may not line up perfectly, most likely not perfectly. Go ahead and clip or pin in place. The top corners are great because that's where your elastic is going to be placed, and then I also like to place clips where the elastic will loop around the ear and come back in. Fold your mask in half to line up your clips to make sure you're putting them in evenly. Then grab some elastic. Here I'm using tape elastic, and roll it up and tuck it inside the 2 layers of fabric and clip in place. If I was using cord elastic, which I use sometimes, that's round instead of flat, you'd want to put a knot on the end of it just to make sure you securely have it in place when you stitch, because sometimes the cord can move a little bit when you're sewing it. But with this flat tape, I'll be able to stitch directly through the elastic to secure it. All right, let's clip that in place and then we'll sew all the way around. Okay, and we're back at my machine. I'm going to start about 1 inch down from one of the corners and do a seam allowance of 1/4 inch or less. Make sure you back stitch over your elastic just to make sure it's really secure. I also like to go over the seams with a back stitch as well to make sure they're secure. Back stitch there. As I'm coming up on the clip, I'm actually going to mark with my finger where the clip was when I take it off and stop before I get there and do a back stitch. I'm going to skip a little bit, about 1/2 inch, and then restart. That way I'm going to have somewhere to put the elastic later. I will back stitch over the seam again and stop before I get to this clip as well, leaving a space to turn the mask right side out. Alright, so now what you're going to want to do is flip the mask right side out. Might take a little bit of time depending on how big of a hole you had left. And then really kind of press against the seam to make sure there aren't any gaps and to really get everything very flush. Play around with the fabric and then go ahead and iron the seams flat so that the mask ends up looking very crisp and polished with nice edges, because we are going to go ahead and stitch all the way around the mask. The stitching around the mask will allow it to keep its shape after it's been washed, so the mask will hold its integrity. Something else that you should keep in mind is that after this video cuts from here into figuring out the sizes of the elastic, I should note that I did not film sizing the elastic. What you're going to want to do is take the mask, put it up to your face or whoever's going to wear it, wrap the elastic around your ears, and kind of note where on the elastic it would go into the holes of the mask itself. There's a really light chalk marks already on the elastic for this, so you won't see that in this video, as I am now tucking the elastic into the mask. I'm doing it on both sides here and folding it in half and making sure that they're even so the mask doesn't appear lopsided when the person who's going to wear it puts it on. So I do this with both sides. Next thing I do is I have a pipe cleaner that I'm going to wrap completely in washi tape. The pipe cleaner was cut in half, so it's about the right size. This is going to add the structure and kind of the bendable piece that goes on the bridge of the nose. Insert that into the mask, but let it sit in the middle of the mask so that you can sew around it. Alright, we're in the home stretch now. Take the mask back to your machine using a straight stitch. Go ahead and get very, very close to the edge, as close as you're comfortable, and stitch all the way around the mask. Now remember that wrapped pipe cleaner is in the middle. I've pushed it away so that it doesn't get in the way of my stitching on the edges. Make sure that when you are stitching over the inserted elastic, you go ahead and back stitch. You want to give it a little extra security so it doesn't pop out. Go slow when you go over the seams, as it's a little bit thicker fabric. And then when you come around to where you started, make sure that you have appropriately tucked the fabric in and you close up that hole that you used to turn the mask right side out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually playing around with the pipe cleaner, and I've pushed it up towards the top. and I'm just eyeballing this. I'm going to sew around it. You create a nice little bracket. I've tried to make it as even as possible so it doesn't look asymmetrical, and I'm using that top seam as a guideline. And my finger there notes the end of it, so I estimate when I get all the way around, and I create a little pouch for it so that it doesn't float in the mask anymore. It's there and it's secure. And there's your mask.